Blood trickled down Marcus Washington's face as 3 officers pinned him against his own garage door. "This property belongs to FBI Deputy Director Washington," he gasped. Officer Miller tightened the cuffs. "Sure it does, buddy. And I'm the president." The radio crackled. Everything was about to change. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story of racial profiling and justice, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to join our community fighting for truth and equality. What would you do if police officers accused you of trespassing on your own property? Stay tuned to see how this FBI agent turns the tables on those who wrongfully accused him. Marcus Washington stood in the driveway of his newly purchased Victorian home in Oakland's prestigious Rockridge neighborhood, squinting against the bright Saturday morning sun as he surveyed the property. At 52 years old, the deputy director of the FBI's Civil Rights Division had finally achieved a personal milestone that connected deeply to his past. The historic 3-story home, with its ornate gingerbread trim and spacious wraparound porch, represented more than just a real estate investment. It embodied a childhood dream and honored his late father's legacy as a civil rights attorney who had fought housing discrimination cases in Oakland during the turbulent 1970s. Marcus wore faded jeans, a plain gray T-shirt, and work boots, his casual weekend attire, a stark contrast to the tailored suits he typically wore at the Bureau's headquarters. He had deliberately chosen to come alone today, wanting private time to envision the renovations before the contractors arrived on Monday. 25 years with the FBI had honed Marcus's observational skills, so he immediately noticed the white sedan that drove slowly past his property for the 3rd time in 30 minutes. He pretended not to pay attention, continuing his inspection of the weathered fence that bordered the expansive corner lot, but his professional instincts had already kicked into high alert. As one of only 4 black families in this predominantly white enclave, Marcus had anticipated some level of neighborhood scrutiny, but the persistent surveillance stirred memories of countless civil rights cases he'd investigated throughout his distinguished career. Just yesterday, he'd endured the subtle discriminatory behaviors that had become all too familiar Mrs. Peterson, the elderly white woman next door, peeking through her curtains whenever he came or went. Thomas and Emily Reynolds crossing to the opposite sidewalk rather than passing directly by him. And thankfully, Sarah Chen, the young Asian-American woman from 3 houses down who had been the only neighbor to offer a genuine welcome basket and warm smile. Marcus's phone vibrated in his pocket, displaying his colleague, Special Agent James Taylor's name on the screen. "Taylor, what's up?" Marcus answered, keeping his voice low. "Sir, we've got a breakthrough on the Oakland PD profiling case. The data analysis came back showing black residents are 6.8 times more likely to be stopped for questioning in affluent neighborhoods compared to white residents. And that's after controlling for all other variables." Marcus nodded to himself, processing the information that would strengthen the civil rights investigation his division had been building against the Oakland Police Department for the past 18 months. "Good work. Email me the full report and schedule a briefing for Monday morning. This could be exactly what we need to move forward with formal charges." As Marcus ended the call, he noticed 3 uniformed officers approaching his property with purposeful strides, hands hovering near their holstered weapons. The tallest officer, a white man with a crew cut and squared shoulders, led the trio with an expression Marcus had witnessed countless times in his career, a look of predetermined suspicion that had nothing to do with actual evidence and everything to do with the color of Marcus's skin. Despite his senior position at the FBI, despite the landmark cases he'd won against police departments for exactly this type of racial profiling, despite the doctoral degree and numerous commendations hanging on his office wall in this moment, Marcus felt a familiar tension creep up his spine, the same feeling he'd experienced since adolescence whenever law enforcement appeared in his vicinity. He took a deep breath, straightened his posture, and prepared for what was coming, knowing that despite his credentials, he was first and foremost a black man in America about to be confronted by police who saw his presence in this affluent neighborhood as inherently suspicious. "Can I help you, officers?" Marcus asked calmly, maintaining a neutral expression as the 3 police officers formed a semicircle around him. The tallest officer, whose nameplate read Miller, took the lead, his hand still resting on his holster. "We received a call about a suspicious person trespassing on this property." Miller stated, his eyes scanning Marcus with barely concealed distrust. "The homeowners have reported recent break-in attempts." Marcus nodded, maintaining his composure despite the familiar sting of these words. "I understand your concern, but there's been a misunderstanding. I'm Marcus Washington, and I purchased this house last month. This is my property." Officer Rodriguez, a Latino officer standing to Miller's right, glanced around the yard. "Do you have any identification that confirms you're the homeowner, sir?" Marcus reached for his back pocket but paused when Officer Miller tensed. "My wallet with my driver's license is in my car, parked just there," Marcus explained, gesturing toward his black Audi at the curb. "I also have the property deed and my FBI credentials in the glove compartment." The third officer, Barrett, a younger black officer who had remained silent, shifted uncomfortably at the mention of FBI credentials. Miller's expression hardened into a skeptical smirk. "FBI credentials, right. Let's see some ID first." Marcus calculated his options, drawing on 25 years of law enforcement experience. As a high-ranking FBI official who specialized in civil rights violations, he knew precisely how this interaction should legally proceed. He also knew, as a black man in America, how quickly these situations could escalate regardless of legal protocols. "I'm going to walk to my car now to get my identification," Marcus stated clearly, taking deliberate steps toward his vehicle. "Stop right there," Miller commanded, his tone suddenly aggressive. "We haven't cleared you to move yet." Marcus froze mid-step, feeling his heart rate accelerate despite his professional training. "Officer, I'm simply attempting to provide the identification you requested. My credentials are in my vehicle." Miller moved forward, closing the gap between them. "Put your hands where I can see them." "How do we know that's actually your car? For all we know, you could be reaching for a weapon." Marcus raised his hands slowly to shoulder height, acutely aware that neighbors had begun to gather on their porches and sidewalks to watch the unfolding scene. From the corner of his eye, he spotted Mrs. Peterson peering through her window, phone in hand, likely calling for additional police response. Thomas Reynolds had emerged from his house across the street, smartphone raised, recording the encounter. "Officer Miller, I understand you're doing your job, but this is a misunderstanding that can be easily cleared up." Marcus said, his voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "I am the legal owner of this property and a federal law enforcement officer." Sarah Chen appeared from down the block, walking briskly toward the scene. "Officers," she called out, "he's telling the truth. He is the new homeowner. I welcomed him to the neighborhood last week." Miller barely acknowledged her, instead addressing Marcus with increasing hostility. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back. We're going to sort this out down at the station." Marcus remained still, weighing his options. "I do not consent to being detained without reasonable suspicion of a crime. I am simply standing on my own property." Miller's face flushed with anger. "That's it. You're being detained for trespassing and resisting an officer's commands." Before Marcus could respond, Miller grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back, while Rodriguez moved in to assist. As they forcibly turned him around, Miller conducted a pat-down search and discovered a small metal tool in Marcus's pocket. "What's this?" Miller demanded, holding up a professional lock-picking set that Marcus used in FBI tactical training. "That's standard FBI equipment that I'm authorized to carry," Marcus explained, wincing as the handcuffs were tightened around his wrists. "I teach entry techniques at Quantico," Miller laughed derisively. "Sure you do. We've got a burglar with lockpicks who claims he's FBI. That's a new one." The officers marched Marcus toward the front of the property, where a growing crowd of neighbors had gathered, many with phones recording. As they reached the garage door, Marcus attempted once more to de-escalate the situation. "Officers, I am FBI Deputy Director Marcus Washington. If you check my credentials in my vehicle, you'll confirm my identity and avoid making a serious mistake." Miller responded by roughly pushing Marcus against the garage door, causing his forehead to strike the hard surface. Marcus felt warm blood trickle down from a small cut above his eyebrow as Miller leaned in close and whispered, "Listen, buddy, I don't care if you're the director of the whole damn FBI. In this neighborhood, you're just another black man who doesn't belong here." The police cruiser's interior smelled of artificial pine and stale sweat as Marcus sat in the back seat separated from the front by a thick plexiglass partition, his hands still uncomfortably restrained behind him. Through the window, he watched Officers Miller and Rodriguez searching his property without consent, while Officer Barrett stood near the vehicle, occasionally glancing at Marcus with an unreadable expression. The cut on Marcus's forehead had stopped bleeding but left a dried trail of blood down the side of his face that he couldn't wipe away due to the handcuffs. As a career FBI agent who had investigated countless civil rights violations, Marcus found himself in the surreal position of experiencing firsthand the very injustice he had spent decades fighting against. His mind drifted back to his first encounter with racial profiling at 16, when a police officer had stopped him while he was walking home from the library, accusing him of matching the description of a robbery suspect. That humiliating incident, being forced to lie face down on the sidewalk while neighbors watched, had ironically inspired his career in law enforcement, driven by a determination to change the system from within. Now, 36 years later, it seemed painfully clear how much work remained undone. Marcus shifted in his seat, deliberately positioning himself to ensure the cruiser's dashboard camera captured his face and the unjustified detention. He had taught this exact tactic to junior agents when wrongfully detained: create as much documentation as possible. Speaking clearly toward the camera, he stated, "I am FBI Deputy Director Marcus Washington, badge number 87429. I am being detained without cause on my own property at 1142 Rockridge Avenue, which I legally purchased on April 10th. The time is approximately 11:27 a.m. on May 15th. Officer Barrett, who stood near enough to hear Marcus through the partially opened window, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Outside, Miller had popped the trunk of Marcus's Audi and was rummaging through its contents. Marcus watched as the officer pulled out his FBI windbreaker, examining it with obvious skepticism. "Hey, Rodriguez, look at this," Miller called out, holding up the jacket. "Our trespasser came prepared with a costume. Got a fake FBI jacket and everything." Rodriguez approached to examine the jacket, his expression less certain than Miller's. "That looks pretty authentic," he remarked, running his fingers over the embroidered FBI letters. Miller scoffed. "These can be bought online. This guy's probably running some kind of scam." Miller reached back into the trunk and pulled out a manila folder containing blueprints for Marcus's planned renovations. He flipped through the pages, then shoved them back into the car with obvious frustration at finding legitimate documentation. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Miller. We've detained a male suspect for trespassing who's claiming to be an FBI agent. Possible federal impersonation charge. We're bringing him in for further questioning." Marcus watched the scene unfold with professional detachment, mentally documenting every procedural violation. When Officer Barrett approached the cruiser, Marcus spoke quietly but firmly. "Officer Barrett, you should know that you're participating in an unlawful detention and search. I suggest you consider your next actions very carefully." Barrett glanced toward his colleagues before responding in a hushed tone. "Sir, I'm just following orders. If you really are FBI, this will all get sorted out at the station." Marcus nodded. "I understand. May I use my phone call now? It's my right, even before reaching the station." Barrett hesitated, then nodded, pulling out his cell phone and holding it up to the window. Marcus recited a number from memory, not to a lawyer, as the officers might have expected, but to FBI Assistant Director Diane Reynolds. The call connected after 2 rings. Reynolds came the crisp response. "Diane, it's Marcus Washington. I'm invoking Protocol 17 at 1142 Rockridge Avenue, Oakland. 3 OPD officers, names Miller, Rodriguez, and Barrett." There was a brief pause before Reynolds replied, "Understood. ETA, 12 minutes. Marcus handed the phone back to Barrett, whose expression had transformed from skepticism to concern, as he realized this might not be a bluff. Meanwhile, the scene around Marcus's property had grown increasingly chaotic. At least 20 neighbors now stood watching from a distance, many recording with their phones. A local news van had parked at the end of the street, likely alerted by social media posts about the incident. Sarah Chen was engaged in a heated discussion with Officer Rodriguez, holding up what appeared to be property documents that Marcus had shared with her during their welcome conversation. "This is his house," she insisted loudly enough for Marcus to hear. "I have the proof right here with his name on it." Rodriguez examined the papers, but ultimately handed them back to her with a dismissive gesture. "Ma'am, please step back. This is a police matter." As Miller returned to the cruiser and opened the driver's door, a sleek black Suburban with tinted windows turned sharply onto the street, followed by two more identical vehicles. Marcus felt a slight smile cross his lips as he recognized the FBI tactical team's standard approach formation. The first Suburban screeched to a halt directly in front of the police cruiser, blocking its path. "Do you believe Officer Miller was acting out of genuine suspicion, or was his behavior motivated by racial bias?" Comment number 1, if you think this was a clear case of racial profiling, or number 2, if you believe the officers were just doing their job. Have you or someone you know ever experienced being treated as suspicious on your own property? The story of Marcus Washington unfortunately reflects the reality for many Black Americans across the country. Hit that like button if you think more accountability is needed in law enforcement, and subscribe to join our community fighting for equal justice. Now let's see what happens when these officers discover who they've really handcuffed and how quickly the power dynamic is about to shift. The black Suburban's driver's door swung open, and FBI Assistant Director Diane Reynolds emerged wearing a crisp navy pantsuit with her FBI badge prominently displayed on her belt. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her expression conveyed the calm intensity that had made her legendary within the Bureau. Without hesitation, she approached Officer Miller, who had instinctively straightened his posture at the arrival of what was clearly a federal presence. "I'm Assistant Director Diane Reynolds, Federal Bureau of Investigation," she announced in a voice loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "You are currently detaining Deputy Director Marcus Washington, my superior, and the head of our Civil Rights Division. Release him immediately." Miller's face drained of color, but he attempted to maintain his authority. "Ma'am, we're conducting a trespassing investigation within our jurisdiction. We can sort this out at the station." Reynolds didn't flinch. "Officer Miller, this isn't a request. You have approximately 60 seconds to release Deputy Director Washington before I place a call to your police commissioner, the mayor, and the Attorney General of the United States, all of whom are personal friends of Director Washington." As she spoke, 6 FBI agents in tactical gear emerged from the other vehicles, creating a perimeter around the scene. A younger female agent approached the police cruiser, where Marcus was detained, making direct eye contact with Officer Barrett, who stood nearby. "Open the door," she commanded. Barrett looked to Miller for guidance, but Miller was still locked in a standoff with Reynolds. Rodriguez, sensing the shift in power, stepped forward. "Maybe we should verify their credentials first," he suggested to Miller, clearly looking for a way to de-escalate the situation. Reynolds reached into her jacket and produced not only her FBI identification, but also a copy of Marcus's credentials. "Officer Miller, not only is this man the Deputy Director of the FBI's Civil Rights Division, but this property has been registered in his name for over a month. Your department received official notification of his residence here as a matter of professional courtesy between agencies." The growing crowd of neighbors murmured as they witnessed the dramatic reversal unfolding before them. Sarah Chen stood with her arms crossed, a vindicated expression on her face. The Reynolds family had stopped recording and were now trying to blend into the background, clearly uncomfortable with the turn of events. Finally, Miller nodded to Barrett, who quickly moved to open the cruiser door and help Marcus out. As the handcuffs were removed, Marcus rolled his shoulders and massaged his wrists, the imprints of the too tight restraints still visible on his dark skin. Despite the humiliation he had endured, Marcus maintained absolute professionalism, his years of FBI training evident in his composed demeanor. "Thank you, Assistant Director Reynolds," he said formally before turning to address the officers. Officers Miller, Rodriguez, and Barrett. I understand you were responding to a call, but what transpired here today represents a textbook case of racial profiling and violation of constitutional rights. Marcus's mind flashed back to 6 months earlier, when he and Diane had worked together to build a landmark case against the New Orleans Police Department for systematic civil rights violations. That case had resulted in departmental reforms and the conviction of 3 officers. Now, in a twist of bitter irony, he found himself at the center of a nearly identical scenario. Deputy Director Washington Miller began his tone drastically different from the contemptuous manner he had used earlier. There seems to have been a misunderstanding. We received a call about a suspicious person. Marcus raised his hand, cutting off the explanation. What you received, Officer Miller, was a call about a black man in an affluent neighborhood, and you responded with immediate presumption of criminality, despite having no evidence of wrongdoing. He gestured toward his bleeding forehead. Your actions today will be thoroughly reviewed as part of an ongoing federal investigation into the Oakland Police Department's pattern of racial profiling, an investigation that until today you were unaware of. The officers exchanged alarmed glances as they realized the full implications of their actions. Not only had they detained and roughed up a high-ranking FBI official, but they had unwittingly provided perfect evidence for a federal case against their department. By now, several news crews had arrived, drawn by the neighbors' social media posts about the incident. Sensing the potential for this story to explode across national headlines, Marcus made a strategic decision. He turned to Reynolds and spoke quietly. Let's secure the scene and evidence, but minimize media engagement. This incident needs to be incorporated into our broader investigation rather than becoming a spectacle. Reynolds nodded in agreement and began directing her team to collect witness statements and camera footage from neighbors. As the FBI agents established control of the scene, Officer Barrett approached Marcus cautiously. "Sir," he said in a low voice, "I want to apologize for my part in this. I had doubts about how we were handling the situation, but I didn't speak up." Marcus studied the young officer thoughtfully. Officer Barrett, sometimes the most important voice, is the one that questions unjust actions from within the system. If you're willing to share information about departmental practices, it could make a significant difference. Barrett glanced nervously at Miller, who was now being formally interviewed by an FBI agent, before nodding slightly. "I'll be in touch." As Marcus prepared to leave with Reynolds and her team, he looked back at the 3 officers who had detained him. Miller stood stiffly, his earlier arrogance replaced by barely concealed fear. Rodriguez looked thoughtful, perhaps reassessing his own complicity in the department's practices. Barrett watched Marcus with an expression that suggested the beginning of a personal reckoning. The neighbors who had gathered, many of whom had initially viewed Marcus with suspicion when he purchased the property, now whispered among themselves, reassessing their own assumptions in light of the revelation of his identity and position. Marcus knew that while this incident had been personally humiliating, it had also provided an unprecedented opportunity to expose and address the very injustices he had dedicated his career to fighting. As he walked away, he heard Mrs. Peterson ask another neighbor in a hushed voice, "Did you know we had an FBI deputy director living on our street?" The irony wasn't lost on him. His professional status had suddenly made him acceptable in their eyes, in a way his humanity alone had not. 3 days after the incident, Marcus sat in his spacious corner office at the Oakland FBI field headquarters, surrounded by multiple screens displaying footage from police body cameras, neighborhood security systems, and bystanders' cell phones. Each video captured a different angle of his detention, creating a comprehensive visual record that left no doubt about the officer's misconduct. The cut on his forehead had healed into a small scab, a physical reminder of an experience that had transformed from personal humiliation into a professional mission. "Play that segment again," Marcus instructed Special Agent Tamika Johnson, a brilliant analyst who had been with his civil rights team for 5 years. The screen showed Officer Miller's initial approach, his hand resting on his weapon before Marcus had said or done anything threatening. "Notice his body language," Marcus pointed out. "He's already decided I'm a threat before a single word is exchanged. Now compare that to this footage from last month." He pulled up another video showing Miller approaching a white man who was checking the windows of a house in the same neighborhood. In that interaction, Miller's posture was relaxed, his hands nowhere near his weapon, his tone conversational rather than confrontational. "Classic differential treatment," Johnson remarked, making notes in her tablet, "and we've identified 17 similar incidents in the past 6 months alone." Marcus nodded, pulling up Officer Miller's personnel file, which his team had subpoenaed. "Look at this pattern. 12 civilian complaints for excessive force and discriminatory behavior, all filed by Black or Latino residents. Not a single one resulted in disciplinary action." The file revealed that Miller had been with the Oakland PD for 11 years, transferred from a small department in rural California, where he had also accumulated complaints. More disturbing was his connection to the Oakland Police Officers Association, where he served on the legal defense committee that routinely protected officers accused of misconduct. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen, who had become an invaluable witness in the expanding investigation. "I have the security footage from my home system. It clearly shows Miller driving by your house 3 times before the confrontation. Doesn't look like random patrol to me. Coming by the office at 2 p.m. to drop it off." Marcus texted back his thanks, reflecting on how this neighbor had become an unexpected ally. Her testimony about previous incidents she'd witnessed in the neighborhood was helping to establish a pattern of selective enforcement. The investigation had grown significantly since the incident with Marcus, converting his personal experience into an official component of the larger FBI civil rights probe. He had conducted interviews with 23 residents of the Rockridge neighborhood, revealing deeply entrenched racial tensions that most white residents were reluctant to acknowledge. Mrs. Peterson had been particularly revealing in her inadvertent racism, explaining that she had called the police several times about suspicious individuals who turned out to be delivery drivers, maintenance workers, and in one case a Black family looking at a house for sale. Marcus had assigned a team of analysts to review 18 months of police dispatch calls from the neighborhood, which revealed that 87% of suspicious person reports involved people of color, despite the area being less than 15% non-white in population. Most disturbing was the discovery that the initial call about Marcus's trespassing had come from none other than Thomas and Emily Reynolds, the neighbors who had consistently avoided him since he purchased the property. "Sir," called Special Agent Derek Collins. "From across the room, you need to see this." Collins projected a document onto the main screen, a departmental memo from 6 weeks earlier. "We found this in Officer Miller's email. It's a watch list of high-value properties with instructions for increased patrols and preventative contacts with non-residents in these areas." Marcus scanned the document, his jaw tightening as he recognized the thinly veiled directive to profile individuals who didn't appear to belong in wealthy neighborhoods. "This could be our smoking gun," he said quietly. "It establishes departmental policy rather than just individual officer misconduct." As Marcus studied the document, he felt a familiar weight of responsibility. In his 25 years with the Bureau, he had investigated dozens of police departments for civil rights violations, but this case had become deeply personal. Several colleagues had suggested he recuse himself due to his direct involvement, but Marcus knew his experience provided unique insight that could strengthen rather than compromise the investigation. The door opened, and FBI Director James Wilson entered his presence, immediately commanding attention from the entire team. "Marcus, do you have a moment?" he asked, gesturing toward the hallway. Once they were alone, Wilson spoke frankly. "The Attorney General called this morning. The Oakland Police Union is claiming you're using your position to pursue a personal vendetta. They're demanding you step down from the investigation." Marcus had anticipated this pushback. "With all due respect, sir, my personal experience provides crucial first-hand evidence of the department's practices. Removing me would undermine the entire case." Wilson nodded thoughtfully. "I agree, and I've told the AG as much. But tread carefully. This case is attracting national attention, and we need it to be airtight." After Wilson departed, Marcus received another unexpected visitor. Officer Barrett entered the office looking nervous, but determined. "Deputy Director Washington," he began, "I've been thinking about what you said, about speaking up from within the system." He He placed a flash drive on Marcus's desk. This contains internal communications about targeting specific neighborhoods and individuals. There's a group of officers who call themselves the Property Guardians. Miller's one of the leaders. They specifically target black and brown people in affluent areas to, in their words, maintain neighborhood character. This revelation connected directly to other evidence Marcus's team had gathered, suggesting a coordinated effort rather than isolated incidents of bias. As Barrett left promising to provide testimony if needed, Marcus contemplated the complex web of systemic discrimination his investigation was uncovering. What had begun as a humiliating personal encounter was expanding into a case that could potentially transform policing practices not just in Oakland, but nationwide. That evening, as Marcus finally returned to his Rockridge home, which he had avoided since the incident, he noticed fresh graffiti sprayed across his garage door, "FBI not welcome." Rather than feeling intimidated, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The overt hostility confirmed what he had always known: his presence as a black man in this space represented a challenge to long-established power structures, regardless of his professional status or achievements. As he cleaned the graffiti, Marcus reflected on how the personal had become political and how his individual experience was inseparable from the broader struggle for justice that had defined both his career and his identity. The FBI is overreaching its authority and targeting dedicated police officers who risk their lives daily to keep our communities safe, Officer Miller declared from the podium, his police union representatives flanking him on either side as cameras flashed. The press conference, hastily organized by the Oakland Police Officers Association, was being broadcast live across local stations, a coordinated pushback against the expanding FBI investigation. Marcus watched the coverage from his office, noting how Miller had transformed his appearance for the cameras, trading his usual stern demeanor for a sympathetic, almost vulnerable persona. "I approached a suspicious individual as part of my regular patrol duties." Miller continued, his voice modulated to convey reasonableness. At no point did Deputy Director Washington clearly identify himself or provide credentials. This is being portrayed as racial profiling when it was simply good police work. Marcus muted the television as Assistant Director Reynolds entered his office, her expression grim. "They're not just fighting back through the media," she reported, placing a folder on his desk. "We've received 3 formal complaints against you from the Police Officers Association claiming investigative bias, abuse of power, and personal vendetta. They've also filed a motion to have all evidence from your detention excluded from our broader investigation." Marcus skimmed the documents, unsurprised by the tactical counterattack. "And the death threats have started," Reynolds added, sliding across a photograph of Marcus's garage door, now spray-painted with the words, "Race Traitor and Next Time a Bullet." Security camera footage had captured 3 masked individuals vandalizing the property at 3:17 that morning, but their faces were obscured and the vehicle's license plate deliberately muddied. "I've assigned 2 agents to protective detail," Reynolds continued, "and we should discuss relocating you temporarily." Marcus shook his head. "If I leave my home, they win. Double the surveillance instead." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. FBI Director Wilson entered, followed by Marcus's longtime mentor, Deputy Director Robert Chen. Their expressions suggested this wasn't a routine visit. Marcus Wilson began, "We need to discuss your role in this investigation." Marcus had been anticipating this conversation since the case had exploded into national headlines. "The Attorney General is concerned about the appearance of conflict," Wilson continued carefully. "Given your personal involvement in the triggering incident, there are questions about objectivity." Robert Chen, who had recruited Marcus to the Bureau 25 years earlier, spoke next. "Marcus, you know I've always supported your work, but this situation is unprecedented. The police union is claiming entrapment, suggesting you deliberately provoked officers knowing the FBI was already investigating the department." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying the 2 men who had been allies throughout his career. "So the recommendation is that I recuse myself." Wilson nodded. "It would protect the integrity of the case. You could still provide testimony as a victim, but oversight would transfer to another deputy director." Marcus felt a familiar pressure building behind his temples, the frustration of navigating institutional politics while pursuing justice. With all due respect, director removing me plays directly into their strategy. They want to reframe this as my personal crusade, rather than part of our established pattern investigation. The tension in the room was palpable as Marcus stood and walked to the window overlooking downtown Oakland. 3 weeks before my detention, we had already documented 47 incidents of similar profiling by OPD officers. My personal experience simply provides irrefutable evidence of their practices captured on multiple cameras with dozens of witnesses. Robert Chen sighed heavily. Marcus, no one is questioning the validity of the case. But your career is at stake here. If you step back now, you can preserve your reputation and still see this through to completion from a different position. The subtext was clear. The political pressure was mounting and sacrificing. Marcus might be the expedient solution to preserve the larger investigation. Before Marcus could respond, Special Agent Johnson burst into the office without knocking, her usual professional composure visibly shaken. "Sir, we found these in the evidence seized from Miller's locker during the warranted search." She placed several photographs on the desk, surveillance images of Marcus taken over several weeks, entering his new home, shopping at local stores, even meeting with contractors. The final photo showed Marcus's car with a handwritten note attached, "Target acquired." The room fell silent as the 4 FBI officials processed the implications. "This wasn't random," Marcus said quietly. "Miller targeted me specifically." Director Wilson picked up one of the photos, his expression hardening. "This changes everything. This wasn't just profiling. It was targeted harassment of a federal official." As they discussed the new evidence, Marcus received a call from an unexpected source, Mrs. Peterson, his elderly neighbor, who had initially viewed his presence with suspicion. "Mr. Washington," she began hesitantly, "I need to tell you something. I've been watching Officer Miller and his partners meeting in a car down the street. They sit there for hours watching your house. Last week I overheard them talking about keeping the neighborhood clear of outsiders. I should have said something sooner, but I was afraid." Her testimony provided crucial corroboration of deliberate targeting rather than random enforcement. By mid-afternoon, the case had expanded beyond Oakland, with Marcus's team identifying similar patterns in police departments across 3 other cities, where affluent neighborhoods bordered diverse communities. What had begun as a local profiling investigation was revealing a more disturbing national pattern of race-based property protection. Outside the FBI building, 2 opposing groups of protesters had gathered. Civil rights organizations rallied in support of Marcus and the investigation, while police supporters, many wearing blue ribbons, demanded the FBI stop attacking our officers. Local news crews captured the growing tension as the 2 groups faced off across the street from each other. That evening, as Marcus worked late, reviewing evidence, he received an anonymous text. "Not all cops support Miller. Some of us want change too. Check the Oak PD server password file TG7. Directory Neighborhood Watch has everything you need." The message came from a number registered to the Oakland Police Department but couldn't be traced to a specific officer. The tip suggested deeper corruption and potentially more officers willing to break ranks. Marcus faced a critical decision: pursue his personal vindication against Miller and his accomplices, or protect the broader investigation into systemic discrimination that could impact thousands of lives across multiple jurisdictions. As he weighed these options, Marcus thought of his father, who had fought similar battles decades earlier. In his father's study, preserved in Marcus's childhood home, sat boxes of case notes from housing discrimination lawsuits in the 1970s. Those yellowing documents might contain historical context that could strengthen the current case, revealing how property-based discrimination had simply evolved rather than disappeared. With renewed determination, Marcus called his investigative team together. "We're going to approach this from 2 angles," he instructed. "Continue building the case against Miller and his direct accomplices, but simultaneously expand our investigation into the national pattern. This isn't about me anymore. It's about exposing a system that has persisted across generations." As his team dispersed to continue their work, Marcus stood alone in his office. the weight of both personal and professional responsibility heavy on his shoulders. The next steps he took would determine not only his own vindication, but potentially impact policing practices nationwide. Do you believe Officer Miller was acting alone, or was his behavior part of a larger systemic problem within the police department? Comment number 1, if you think this represents individual misconduct, or number 2, if you believe it reveals institutional racism. Has this story changed your perspective on law enforcement interactions in affluent neighborhoods? Many viewers have shared their own experiences with racial profiling in the comments, showing how widespread this issue really is. If you support holding officers accountable for discriminatory practices, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on similar stories of justice and accountability. As our story continues, we'll see how Marcus uncovers a conspiracy much larger than a single incident of racial profiling, connecting present-day discrimination to historical patterns that have shaped American neighborhoods for generations. The musty scent of old paper filled Marcus's childhood home as he carefully opened boxes of his father's legal files that had remained untouched for nearly 2 decades. His father, Jonathan Washington, had been a pioneering civil rights attorney in Oakland during the 1970s, specializing in housing discrimination cases that helped desegregate neighborhoods that had previously excluded black-to-blacken families through redlining and restrictive covenants. Marcus had cleared his weekend to search these archives for historical context that might strengthen the current investigation, a decision that proved prophetic when he discovered a manila folder labeled Rockridge Properties 1976. Inside were detailed notes about a lawsuit his father had filed against a neighborhood association and several police officers who had collaborated to intimidate black homebuyers in what was now Marcus's own neighborhood. The yellowing documents revealed a systematic campaign of surveillance-targeted traffic stops and anonymous threats designed to maintain the area's exclusively white character tactics, disturbingly similar to what Marcus himself had experienced 49 years later. Most striking was a name that appeared repeatedly in his father's notes: Reynolds Construction Company, owned by Harold Reynolds, who had served as chairman of the neighborhood association. With a jolt of recognition, Marcus realized this must be the family of Thomas Reynolds, his current neighbor who had called the police to report his trespassing. The connection was too significant to be coincidental. Monday morning found Marcus in an urgent strategy session with his investigative team, the conference room walls covered with photos, documents, and timelines that mapped an increasingly complex conspiracy. Officer Miller isn't just a biased cop, Marcus explained, pointing to a network diagram they had constructed. He's connected to a group of officers working with Platinum Bay Properties, a development company trying to buy up properties in specific Oakland neighborhoods. Special Agent Johnson pulled up property records on the main screen. Platinum Bay has purchased 7 homes in Rockridge in the past 18 months, all at below market value from owners who sold quickly after reporting safety concerns or neighborhood changes. The pattern was becoming clear. The officers would target non-white homeowners or potential buyers with harassment and intimidating police presence, creating an atmosphere of unwelcome that pressured them to leave or decline to purchase. The properties would then be bought by Platinum Bay at reduced prices and resold to approved buyers at significant profit. And here's where it gets interesting. Marcus continued pulling up corporate registration documents. Platinum Bay's primary investor is none other than William Reynolds, Thomas Reynolds' brother and grandson of Harold Reynolds, who ran a similar scheme in the 1970s. Barrett, the young officer who had become their confidential informant, had provided crucial internal communications, showing that Miller and 5 other officers received consulting fees from Platinum Bay through a shell company. The scheme wasn't limited to Oakland. Marcus's team had identified similar patterns in affluent neighborhoods in Atlanta, Chicago, and Boston, suggesting a nationwide network of discriminatory practices disguised as property development and neighborhood improvement. The investigation had expanded dramatically, with potential RICO charges for the officers and developers involved in what amounted to a modern form of housing discrimination. There's something else you need to see. Special Agent Collins announced entering the conference room with a flash drive. Barrett just delivered this. It's footage from a hidden camera in the police union office. The video showed Miller meeting with several other officers and a man identified as William Reynolds. "We need to clear out 3 more properties on Rockridge Avenue," Reynolds was saying. "My sources tell me there's another black family looking at the Victorian on the corner. Make sure they get the message that they're not welcome." Miller nodded, replying, "We've got dedicated patrols already. Trust me, they'll get the picture real quick." The most damning moment came when Reynolds mentioned Marcus directly. "What about this FBI guy who bought the Henderson place? Can we pressure him too?" Miller smiled coldly. "Already on it. He may have a fancy title, but he'll learn his place just like the others." This evidence confirmed what Marcus had suspected: he had been deliberately targeted because of his race, regardless of his professional status. The conspiracy extended beyond individual officers to include developers, city officials, and even members of the zoning board who fast-tracked approvals for Platinum Bay projects while delaying permits for properties owned by Analaw.com minorities. As Marcus coordinated with the U.S. Attorney's Office to prepare federal charges, an unexpected ally emerged. Sarah Chen, the neighbor who had defended Marcus during his detention, revealed that she was not simply a concerned resident, but an investigative journalist who had been researching housing discrimination in Oakland for over a year. "I moved to Rockridge specifically to document these practices," she explained, sharing her extensive files with Marcus's team. "I recognized you from your civil rights work and was planning to approach you for comment when all this happened." Chen's documentation provided additional evidence, including recordings of neighborhood association meetings, where coded language about maintaining community standards masked clearly discriminatory intentions. The investigation faced a significant complication when Marcus discovered potential connections to federal law enforcement. An email chain provided by Barrett revealed that Miller had contacted someone identified only as federal contact to run background checks on potential homebuyers. The implication that someone within the FBI or another federal agency might be complicit in the discrimination scheme was deeply troubling and required careful internal investigation. Director Wilson assigned a separate team from the Washington, D.C. headquarters to quietly investigate this federal connection without alerting potential accomplices. Meanwhile, Marcus focused on building the core case against Miller and the Reynolds brothers. The team meticulously documented 16 incidents where Black or Latino homeowners or potential buyers in Rockridge had been subjected to pretextual stops, excessive police presence, or outright harassment. In 14 of these cases, the individuals ultimately chose not to move into the neighborhood or to sell their properties, often at losses of tens of thousands of dollars. Marcus's own experience provided the 17th and most thoroughly documented case, with multiple video recordings, witness statements, and the rare opportunity to question the perpetrators under oath as part of the federal investigation. As the case expanded, Marcus took extraordinary security precautions. The death threats had increased, now targeting not just him, but members of his investigative team. Barrett had been forced to go on administrative leave for his protection after his car was vandalized with the message, "Rats die." Despite the pressure, Marcus remained resolute, driven by the knowledge that he was continuing his father's unfinished work. The parallel to his father's battles in the 1970s was striking. The tactics of housing discrimination had evolved, but the underlying objective remained the same: controlling who could live in desirable neighborhoods based on race. As Marcus prepared to execute search warrants on Platinum Bay's offices and the homes of the Reynolds brothers, he received a warning from a source within the Oakland Police Department. Miller and his associates had been tipped off about the impending raids and were destroying evidence. Marcus realized that the conspiracy reached higher into the department than they had initially believed, possibly including someone with access to federal investigation plans. With time running out, Marcus made a bold decision that would put him face to face with the man who had humiliated him and who represented the persistent discrimination that had plagued American housing for generations. Rather than waiting for the formal raids, Marcus would set a trap using the one thing he knew: Miller couldn't resist another opportunity to intimidate a black homeowner in Rockridge. But this time, Marcus would be fully prepared with a team of federal agents ready to document every action and word. As Marcus finalized the details of the operation with his team, he thought about the generations of black Americans who had faced similar discrimination without the power or resources to fight back. His position gave him the rare opportunity to expose and dismantle a system that had persisted despite decades of civil rights legislation. This isn't just about prosecuting Miller, or even the Reynolds brothers, he told his team. This is about changing the system that allows this discrimination to continue in different forms across generations. With the trap set and teams in position, Marcus prepared to confront not just the individuals who had targeted him, but the entrenched system of racial exclusion they represented. The full moon cast long shadows across Marcus's front yard as he deliberately moved around his property with a flashlight, making himself visible to anyone watching the house. For the past week, he had carefully established a pattern of late-night property inspections, knowing that Miller's surveillance team would notice. Tonight, however, was different. 20 FBI agents were positioned throughout the neighborhood in unmarked vehicles and neighboring houses, including Sarah Chen's home directly across the street. Every inch of Marcus's property was covered by hidden cameras and microphones, creating an inescapable web of surveillance. Target vehicle approaching from the east came the quiet voice of Special Agent Johnson through Marcus's concealed earpiece. Black SUV, 3 occupants. Matching the vehicle, Barrett identified as William Reynolds' personal transportation. Marcus continued his inspection of the property's perimeter fence, seemingly oblivious to the approaching threat but acutely aware of every development. The FBI's plan was simple but effective: create an opportunity for Miller and the Reynolds brothers to reveal their conspiracy in real time, with every word and action recorded as admissible evidence. The black SUV parked 2 blocks away, and thermal imaging confirmed 3 individuals making their way toward Marcus's property on foot, using the cover of large oak trees and parked cars. Marcus had positioned himself in a vulnerable location beside the detached garage where contractors had been installing new electrical systems. The area was partially obscured from street view, creating an appealing target for confrontation. He heard them. Before he saw them, the soft crunch of footsteps on gravel, deliberately muffled. Marcus continued examining the electrical panel, his back turned as Miller's voice broke the silence. Well, well. The FBI deputy director doing handyman work now. Marcus turned slowly, displaying no surprise at finding Officer Miller flanked by 2 men in expensive suits, one of whom he recognized as Thomas Reynolds from his earlier neighborhood encounters. The other, slightly younger, but with the same angular features, must be William Reynolds, the real estate developer at the center of their investigation. "Gentlemen," Marcus replied calmly, "this is private property. Can I help you with something?" Miller stepped forward, no longer wearing his police uniform but dressed in black tactical pants and a dark windbreaker. The lack of uniform was significant. He wasn't here on official business. "Just checking on the neighborhood," Miller said with exaggerated casualness. "Lots of break-ins lately, though I'm surprised you're still around. Most people get the message sooner." The implicit threat hung in the air between them. "What message would that be?" Officer Miller, Marcus asked, activating the conversation that would potentially incriminate all 3 men. William Reynolds stepped forward, his confidence evident in his relaxed posture. "Look, Washington, let's cut to the chase. You're not wanted here. This neighborhood has standards, a certain character we maintain. Your presence, island, disruptive." Marcus raised an eyebrow. Disruptive to what exactly? Property values? The demographic makeup of Rockridge, or your little scheme to intimidate minorities out of buying homes here? The 3 men exchanged glances momentarily, taken aback by Marcus's direct approach. Miller recovered first, his hand moving subtly toward his waistband, where Marcus suspected he carried an off-duty weapon. "You think you know something, but you have no idea who you're dealing with," Miller growled. "Your FBI badge doesn't protect you here. This is our territory." Thomas Reynolds, less composed than his brother, blurted out, "You should have left after we tagged your garage. Next time it won't be just paint." Marcus noted the confession to the vandalism, knowing it was now captured as evidence. So that was you. Interesting. And the surveillance photos in Miller's locker, the coordinated harassment, all part of your neighborhood protection services. William Reynolds' eyes narrowed. You've been digging. Unwise. He gestured expansively toward the surrounding properties. This area has been carefully cultivated for generations. My grandfather built this community with certain values in mind. We simply continue his work ensuring the right sort of people live here. The right sort, Marcus repeated, meaning white. Miller stepped closer, his patience visibly thinning. It's not about race, it's about culture values, property standards. People like you bring down neighborhoods, attract the wrong elements. People like me, Marcus echoed. Harvard-educated federal officials who restore historic properties and contribute to the community, or just black people in general. The confrontation was building toward its critical moment. Marcus needed explicit admissions from all three conspirators, particularly about their coordinated efforts. Why target me, specifically? There are other black homeowners in Oakland. William Reynolds smiled coldly. You're not just any homeowner. You're FBI Civil Rights Division. We know about your investigation into Oakland PD. Miller here identified you immediately. We decided you needed special attention. Miller nodded, pride overcoming caution. I've been watching you for weeks. The same block your father tried to integrate back in the 70s. Washington isn't a common name. I figured out who you were the minute you made an offer on this place. This revelation stunned Marcus, despite his professional composure. Miller had targeted him not randomly but specifically because of his family history and professional position. The conspiracy was even more deliberate than they had suspected. So you knew exactly who I was when you detained me for trespassing on my own property, Marcus clarified, securing the admission for the record. Of course I did, Miller sneered. Needed to send a message. Even an FBI hotshot can be put in his place in our neighborhood. Thomas Reynolds, increasingly agitated, added, We've been keeping this neighborhood safe for decades. My father worked with the police back in the 80s to maintain standards. Miller's just continuing the tradition. William placed a cautionary hand on his brother's arm, but Thomas shook it off. He should know who he's dealing with. Our family built this neighborhood. We decide who lives here, not some federal affirmative action hire. Marcus kept his expression neutral despite the slur. And Platinum Bay Properties benefits financially from this tradition, buying properties at below market value after the owners have been sufficiently intimidated. William's expression hardened. That's just good business. People who don't belong naturally sell for less when they realize their mistake. And the other officers involved Marcus pressed. Barrett Rodriguez, the federal contact who runs background checks, Miller laughed dismissively. Barrett's a rookie, follows orders. Rodriguez plays along. And let's just say we have friends in high places who understand the importance of neighborhood preservation. The three men had formed a semicircle around Marcus, their posture increasingly threatening. William Reynolds checked his watch, a subtle signal that Marcus immediately recognized from his years of field experience. They hadn't come just to talk. I think we've made our position clear, William stated flatly. You have 24 hours to put your house on the market. Platinum Bay will make a fair offer considering the circumstances. After that, we can't guarantee your safety or property. As Miller took another step forward, hand now clearly reaching for his concealed weapon, Marcus gave the signal his team had been waiting for. Federal agents, hands in the air. The command came simultaneously from multiple directions as FBI agents emerged from concealed positions throughout the property. The three conspirators froze, suddenly illuminated by tactical lights from all angles. Miller instinctively reached for his weapon, but stopped when he realized the hopelessness of his position. William Reynolds, Thomas Reynolds, and Officer James Miller. You are under arrest for civil rights violations, conspiracy, extortion, and threatening a federal officer, announced Assistant Director Reynolds, stepping forward with her badge, prominently displayed. Everything you've said in the past 10 minutes has been recorded and will be used against you in federal court. The shock on Miller's face transformed to rage as he realized the trap he had walked into. You son of a he, began lunging toward Marcus despite the agents surrounding them. Two agents intercepted him, forcing him to the ground and securing his weapon, a non-departmental issued handgun with the serial number filed off. As the three men were handcuffed and read their rights, Marcus observed the scene with professional detachment, noting how the power dynamics had completely reversed from their first encounter. Miller, who had once pinned him against his own garage, was now face down on Marcus's lawn, subdued by the federal authority he had mocked. The arrests triggered immediate consequences throughout Oakland. Based on evidence already gathered, FBI teams simultaneously executed search warrants at Platinum Bay's offices, the homes of 4 other implicated police officers, and 2 city officials connected to the conspiracy. The Oakland Police Commissioner, awakened by a midnight call from the FBI director, ordered the immediate suspension of 8 officers pending federal investigation. News crews arrived within 30 minutes of the arrests, having been tipped off by neighbors who witnessed the operation. Marcus faced a critical decision about how publicly to frame the arrests. After consulting with the U.S. attorney assigned to the case, he provided a brief statement, emphasizing the systematic nature of the conspiracy rather than his personal vindication. Tonight's arrests are part of an ongoing federal civil rights investigation into housing discrimination and abuse of police authority, he told the assembled reporters. This case represents not just individual misconduct, but a multi-generational system of racial exclusion that has persisted despite civil rights laws. The FBI remains committed to ensuring equal housing opportunity for all Americans regardless of race. As the suspects were transported to federal holding facilities, Marcus walked through his neighborhood, noting the faces of residents watching from windows and porches. Mrs. Peterson approached him hesitantly, clutching a thick photo album to her chest. "Mr. Washington," she began, her voice quavering, "I need to show you something. I've been documenting strange activities in this neighborhood for over 30 years. People moving out suddenly, police cars circling specific houses, meetings between officers and the Reynolds family." The elderly woman, whom Marcus had initially perceived as part of the problem, had actually been creating a detailed record of the very conspiracy he was investigating. "My late husband thought I was paranoid," she continued, opening the album to reveal meticulously labeled photographs and notes. "But I knew something wasn't right about how certain families were treated." Across the street, the Reynolds family home buzzed with activity, as federal agents carried out boxes of documents and electronic devices. Emily Reynolds stood on her front lawn in a bathrobe, watching her husband being driven away in a federal vehicle. When she noticed Marcus looking in her direction, she quickly retreated inside, closing the door firmly behind her. Sarah Chen approached Marcus, her journalist's notebook in hand, but not currently writing. "This is bigger than Rockridge, isn't it?" she asked perceptively. Marcus nodded. "We've identified similar patterns in at least 7 major cities. Tonight's arrests will hopefully lead to wider investigations nationwide." As dawn broke over Oakland, Marcus returned to his home, surveying the property that had become both the target of racial animus and the site of a significant civil rights victory. The case was far from over, with months of prosecution ahead, but the night's operation had broken open, a conspiracy that had operated in shadows for generations. The most disturbing revelation remained the suggestion of a federal contact assisting the conspirators. Someone within federal law enforcement had potentially compromised the investigation and participated in civil rights violations. Identifying this accomplice would be Marcus's next priority, even if it led to uncomfortable discoveries within his own agency. 6 months after the dramatic night arrests that shattered the Rockridge housing conspiracy, Marcus Washington stood before the Senate Judiciary Committee, his testimony representing the culmination of what had become the most significant civil rights case of his career. The wood-paneled hearing room was filled to capacity with journalists, activists, and government officials, all focused on the distinguished FBI deputy director whose personal experience had exposed a nationwide network of housing discrimination. The investigation began as an examination of racial profiling by the Oakland Police Department. Marcus explained to the assembled senators, his deep voice carrying throughout the chamber, without need for amplification. It expanded to uncover a multi-generational conspiracy involving law enforcement, real estate developers, and government officials working together to exclude Black and Latino residents from specific neighborhoods across 7 major metropolitan areas. The evidence gathered in the months following the initial arrests had proven devastating. James Miller and 12 other Oakland police officers faced federal charges ranging from civil rights violations to extortion and witness intimidation. William and Thomas Reynolds, along with 3 city officials, had been indicted under RICO statutes for operating what prosecutors termed a discriminatory enterprise that had generated over $30 million in profits from manipulated property sales. Most significantly, the investigation had identified similar operations in Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, Miami, Philadelphia, and Seattle, leading to the creation of a national task force dedicated to dismantling these discriminatory networks. Deputy Director Washington Senator Michaels addressed him. Your personal experience of being detained on your own property clearly informed this investigation. Do you believe your professional status ultimately protected you where other victims might have faced worse outcomes? Marcus considered the question carefully. Senator, my FBI credentials didn't protect me from being racially profiled, handcuffed, and injured. What they did provide was the institutional power to investigate afterward. Thousands of Americans face similar discrimination without those resources. That disparity is precisely why federal civil rights enforcement remains essential. After 4 hours of testimony, Marcus departed the Capitol to find hundreds of supporters gathered outside many holding signs with phrases like "Justice for Rockridge" and "End housing discrimination." The case had catalyzed a national conversation about the modern forms of redlining and housing discrimination that persisted despite decades of civil rights legislation. Back in Oakland, Marcus's Victorian home had finally completed its renovation, transformed from a property targeted for intimidation into a symbol of resistance against housing discrimination. The previously unwelcoming neighborhood had undergone its own transformation. The Reynolds family had moved away after Emily Reynolds found herself socially ostracized following her husband's arrest. Their house had been purchased by Dr. Keisha Johnson, a neurosurgeon at Oakland General Hospital, and her family, who Marcus had personally welcomed to the neighborhood. Officer Barrett, who had provided crucial evidence as a confidential informant, had resigned from the Oakland Police Department to pursue a new career developing police reform training programs. His testimony against his fellow officers had required tremendous courage, but had proven essential to securing convictions. I kept thinking about what you said, Barrett had told Marcus during their last meeting, about the most important voice being the one that questions unjust actions from within the system. I couldn't be part of that system anymore, but I can help change it. The Oakland Police Department itself was now operating under a federal consent decree implementing reforms that Marcus had helped design based on his personal and professional experiences. The decree required comprehensive anti-bias training community, oversight of officer discipline, and specific protocols for responding to calls about suspicious persons that required articulable facts beyond racial description. Perhaps most meaningful to Marcus was the scholarship he had established in his father's name for minority students pursuing careers in law enforcement or civil rights law. The Jonathan Washington Memorial Scholarship would ensure that future generations continued the work of transforming institutions from within, carrying forward his father's legacy alongside his own. Sarah Chen's investigative reporting on the housing discrimination conspiracy had earned her the Pulitzer Prize and led to a series of national exposés on similar practices across the country. Her documentation, combined with Mrs. Peterson's 30 years of neighborhood observations, had proven invaluable in court, demonstrating the historical patterns that connected current discriminatory practices to their segregation-era origins. The FBI had conducted a thorough internal investigation to identify the federal contact who had assisted Miller's group. The trail had ultimately led to Assistant Special Agent in charge Richard Harmon, a 28-year veteran who had provided confidential background checks and information on potential black homebuyers in exchange for discounted investment properties from Platinum Bay. Harmon's arrest and subsequent conviction had sent shockwaves through the Bureau, prompting a nationwide audit of potential conflicts of interest among agents with real estate investments. On a warm Saturday afternoon in October, Marcus hosted a neighborhood integration celebration on his front lawn, bringing together longtime residents and newcomers in a deliberate effort to rebuild community bonds on more equitable, prosent-ever terms. Children of various races played together on the carefully restored Victorian's wraparound porch, while adults engaged in conversations that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. Mrs. Peterson, now one of Marcus's strongest allies, had helped organize the event personally, inviting every household on the block. "My husband would have loved to see this," she told Marcus, watching the diverse gathering with evident satisfaction. He always said this neighborhood needed more life, more different kinds of people. As the celebration continued into early evening, Marcus took a moment alone on his porch, reflecting on the journey from discrimination to transformation. The case had become required study at the FBI Academy and police departments nationwide, with Marcus's detention footage used to demonstrate how implicit bias operates even against highly credentialed black professionals. Director Wilson had offered Marcus promotion to FBI director when the current leader retired, but Marcus had declined instead, accepting appointment as head of the newly created Civil Rights Enforcement Division, where he could continue specialized work addressing systemic discrimination. As twilight settled over Rockridge, Marcus watched neighborhood children of all races playing together on his front lawn, their laughter, a stark contrast to the tension that had defined the area just months earlier. A police cruiser slowed as it passed his property, and Marcus instinctively tensed before recognizing the officer behind the wheel, a recent graduate of the reformed Oakland Police Academy. The officer nodded respectfully and continued on his regular patrol, a small but significant indicator of institutional change. The transformation of Rockridge represented both victory and challenge. One neighborhood had begun the difficult process of confronting its discriminatory past and building a more inclusive future, but similar battles continued across the country. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Assistant Director Reynolds' Seattle task force just made 6 arrests. Pattern identical to Oakland. This is spreading. The message reminded Marcus that systemic change required ongoing vigilance, that each victory was just one step in a longer journey toward justice. As the neighborhood gathering wound down and guests departed with warm handshakes and promises of future connections, Marcus remained on his porch contemplating both progress made and challenges ahead. His personal ordeal had transformed into professional purpose, creating ripples of change that extended far beyond one man's experience of discrimination. The Victorian home that had once been the site of humiliation and injury now stood as a beacon of resistance and reform, its restored facade, a physical representation of the hard work required to confront America's unresolved legacy of the levasis noun 14-sev. Housing discrimination. As night fell over Oakland, Marcus Washington sat peacefully on the porch of a home that was finally unquestionably his. Has this story changed your perspective on how racial profiling can affect anyone regardless of their professional status or achievements? If you've experienced or witnessed housing discrimination or racial profiling, please share your thoughts in the comments below. This case demonstrates how one person's courage to stand up against injustice can create systemic change, but the fight continues in neighborhoods across America. If you believe everyone deserves equal treatment under the law, regardless of their race, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories of justice and accountability. Share this video with someone who needs to understand how racial bias operates in housing and law enforcement. Thank you for listening to this story of transformation and perseverance in the face of discrimination. Remember, change begins when we recognize injustice and have the courage to confront it, whether in our neighborhood's institutions or within ourselves. Marcus Washington's story teaches us that racial discrimination persists in America, despite laws meant to prevent it. Even as a high-ranking FBI official, Marcus wasn't immune to racial profiling, showing how deeply ingrained bias remains in our institutions. His experience reveals how discrimination in housing has evolved from overt segregation to subtle tactics of intimidation and selective enforcement. The story illustrates that systemic racism requires systemic solutions. Individual bias from Officer Miller was part of a larger conspiracy involving real estate developers, police departments, and government officials. Addressing such complex discrimination demands institutional reform, not just punishing individual actors. Marcus's decision to use his personal humiliation as fuel for broader justice demonstrates the power of transforming pain into purpose. By connecting his experience to his father's civil rights work, he shows how fighting discrimination is an intergenerational struggle requiring persistence and strategic action. Perhaps most importantly, the story highlights that real change happens when people speak up from within broken systems. Officer Barrett's courage to expose corruption within his department and Mrs. Peterson's decades of documentation proved essential to justice. True progress requires both outsiders pushing for change and insiders willing to stand for what's right, even at personal cost. Has this story made you think differently about racial profiling in your own community? We often hear about discrimination in headlines, but seeing how it impacts even someone with Marcus's credentials reminds us that no one is immune to bias. Have you ever witnessed or experienced profiling based on race, or has someone close to you shared such an experience? Drop a comment below and join this important conversation. If you believe in equal justice and the importance of holding powerful institutions accountable, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We share stories that challenge us to confront uncomfortable truths about our society and inspire action toward meaningful change. Share this video with someone who might benefit from understanding how racial bias operates in modern America, whether in housing, law enforcement, or everyday interactions. Together, we can build communities where everyone is truly welcome regardless of race. Thank you for listening to Marcus's journey from discrimination to transformation. Remember, change begins with awareness, but requires courage and action to become reality.